In November 2014, WBDS presented Top Girls by Caryl Churchill at our Studio Theatre in West Bridgford. We also went on to perform just the initial first act at the Nanda One Act Festival, which we won, and went on to compete in the regional finals. A group of us met to discuss our memories of Top Girls, and the following video are some excerpts from that very long and enjoyable conversation. I also want to pay tribute to the fantastic costumes that Michelin Harris created and the soundtrack that Richie Sharp made, featuring the fabulous songs of that period. It was called Top Girls, and it was really great to have an all-female ensemble. We worked so well together, and an important part of the rehearsal process was just discussing the issues that still sadly affect so many women in our society today. We also had a female set designer, Charlotte Bakewell, whose set was able to be so many different locations with minimal set changes, all of which was done by the acting company. On that set was a picture of Dorothy Lewis, one of our longest standing members, who had sadly died shortly before the performance. And it was lovely to be able to pay tribute to her and to many of the other top girls. When you look at the photos coming up, perhaps you'll see some of our choices. So sit back and enjoy listening to the reunion of the Top Girls.
I played Louise and Gret with lots and lots of very fond memories, dressing up a lot, playing an awful lot, spending a lot of time on the backstories and the balance of power. We experimented quite a lot. There were lots of changes, and it was all very democratic and kind and fun. I particularly liked sitting on the stage, Brechtian-like, watching the others and watching during the rehearsals how their characters developed. It was quite easy to play Gret because basically she's a comic book character. I used my personal anger, my frustration, I think, and my fear and my disappointment at how women's place in society hasn't really moved on. I didn't feel then that it had. And so I channeled all of that into my version of Gret. So the contrast between Gret and Louise wasn't too difficult to achieve, although they did have some similarities, because Gret wanted to change the world, really, and Louise wanted to make changes for herself. However, I think that my characterisation was really driven by Justine's characterisation of Win. Justine and I didn't know each other. I was a new girl with the society, and Justine was very established in the society. We have a relevant age gap for the characters. And the first time we played it at rehearsals, we clinched it first time. So that was very unusual, I think, for both of us. And we managed to maintain it through to the performances. What's changed since the play was written? How did I feel 7 years ago to what I feel now? Well, guess. Possibilities were lost. That's what Churchill was writing about at the time. And I think they've continued to diminish. I think the possibilities of sisterhood are overlooked. We hear about more and more abuse, whether that's the social media or the media as a whole, telling us about it more, but the impression is that it's increased. Exploitation of women during the pandemic has evidently grown again. The coyness around menstruation remains. And the question mark always for me is whether women are born with nurturing qualities or whether they're bestowed upon them. Does it deny men those nurturing qualities? Those questions have never been answered, and unfortunately I don't think they're asked as much as I remember in the 70s when I was a young feminist. Things that weren't addressed in the play were really kind of the objectification of women. And I think since then the women have objectified themselves, and also the use of pornography wasn't explored. But I mean, there was an awful lot of issues explored well, and I think the play is still
I really
fantastic,
don't know how
very
tonight
relevant,
is
and
going to
I
go.
just so loved playing
I
Gret.
kind of hope that you'd maybe had a little think about all those years ago, and we just kind of maybe have a little chat. Tim's quite anxious that it's not too long. Rosie said it quite a few times now. So for most of you, it was the first time I directed you in a play. What do you remember about the rehearsal process? Apart from the length of it.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's the one. Yeah, that was it.
The nights were long, weren't they? The nights were long. I don't think I'd ever spent so much time investigating the characters and creating backstories, and even we talked, didn't we, about the geography of the places where they lived, and I'd never gone through that process before as part of rehearsals. So I found that quite difficult to start with, though I can genuinely say that I think it did help to get a sense of the character.
What was it like to be visible on stage throughout the play, even when you weren't on?
Terrifying. And then just the idea of, yeah, that long first bit where I went from being asleep, waking up as one character, then being dressed, doing the set, being dressed into another character, being another character, eating a 3-course meal and drinking shed loads of wine without the opportunity to potentially run off to the loo, and then straight into being another character for another scene until the end. So that just seemed like a huge, daunting long amount of time to be where you couldn't like nip off to the loo, couldn't nip off and look at your script and go, what's the next bit? I've got to be a different person now. So yeah, it was really it was very, I remember in the rehearsals that was quite weighing quite heavily, and especially the stuff like having to move the sets around ourselves and doing all of that stuff as well. So there's those extra things to think about. It was quite it felt quite challenging. I enjoyed doing it in the end, but it felt like quite aware that there's a bit more going on than in some of the other things. It does add an extra level of tension.
So how did you manage the costume and set changes, because everyone could see everything you were doing?
Yeah, so I needed to have a paper checklist somewhere, because I didn't trust that I would be able to just remember it all and not being able to have a script. And I was absolutely terrified at the knowing that I couldn't get off to go to the loo. Just was my worst nightmare. I know. I did a lot of pretend drinking in the restaurant, in the table scenes. So I thought, if I actually drink all this, we're going to be in trouble here. And I think creating the sets and moving, I mean, we had specific rehearsals, didn't we, put aside just to practice creating, like this, the bit where we had to build the den, Carrie, where you were underneath it while some of us were behind you. That was very challenging, very, very challenging, because it all had to fit together, didn't it? A bit like a jigsaw puzzle.
I hope, though, that the music sort of helped that choreography, because you could almost have that association. Oh, it changes into the chorus, so I need to be doing this now, and that's what I was trying to do anyway.
Was it Sweet Dreams?
Yeah, it's the very beginning. Yeah.
Bit. Yeah, I think I got into a routine of knowing what bit we were at. Is this the bit where I'm still getting this is where I'm having my skirt put on, or my duvet put on as a skirt, I think it was, or something.
But yeah, I think it's one of the plays that we've done that I've done in my life that I especially remember rhythm being really important, especially with us having to move stuff. It was almost like a dance, so it doesn't work.
Because your challenge was to deliver exactly the right plate of food, and I'm going to speak to Rosie in a minute about all that, but the right food to the right people on the right word. It was so precise, the timing for getting the food out so that people could not have their lines interrupted by the arrival of the food, and you and Coralie did that brilliantly. And Rosie, you were the stage manager, very ably assisted by Rob Dixon. How did you manage all the food that the actors ate? And it was a 3-course banquet, basically, with wine.
I think banquets. I was
just going to say, I'm pleased I didn't have to eat it, even though I'd prepared it, because it kind of, I mean, we tried sort of, to provide people with vaguely warm food if it was supposed to be warm, but I think by the time it got there and you were eating it, it was not of the quality that certainly would have got through a proper restaurant. I mean, it was a real challenge, particularly with getting everything ready in time for it to go, because it all went at the same time. So, we had to have it all there before the show started. We were very conscious about putting it in the same place on the sort of the dresser that was kind of the food was taken from, so that Coralie and Kerry knew exactly where it was going to be on there. That was a bit of a challenge, and just I think just the practicalities of being in the space at the studio with a microwave and nothing else, and actors sort of in and out and through. Rob and I mean, if Rob hadn't been there, it would have been just you wouldn't have been able to do it on your own. But I think even more than that, when we did do the one act festival, Kerry mentioned about that, my boot, I mean, it was all right doing it for a sort of a 7 o'clock, 7:30 performance, but doing it to be there at 9 o'clock in the morning, I had flasks full of soup, and it very definitely was cold things that they ate. So yeah.
Justine always said that she got the best food because she had cheese and crackers and grapes, like perfectly edible. But that's another challenge, isn't it? Because the restaurant scene, we are eating, drinking, speaking, so you have to choreograph that. Plus, that's the scene where there was a lot of talking over each other. So it was really challenging. And
you gave birth in the middle of dinner.
Well, as you do when you're pretending to be a man.
Top Girls is very much an ensemble piece, and with the exception of Claire, you all had multiple parts. So what strategies did you use to differentiate the different characters that you played?
Well, Mrs. Kidd was easy to make different because I decided to try to play her as very timid and anxious. So I gave her, the fiddling with her wedding ring. I tried to make her sort of try to disappear into herself a little bit. And I had sort of hesitation and tried to do hesitation and uncertainty in her voice. Whereas if you compare that to Joyce, well, she was just common. So for Joyce, it was, I mean, the costume was just so awful, so drab, that when you put that saggy old tatty holy cardigan on and slippers and then scrape everything back, and you've got a fag on the go, I mean, you feel common before you've even opened your mouth. So it was quite easy from that point of view. And then with the Pope, I just tried to almost channel my teacher mode, to be, I find it quite easy, I think, because of work, to be quite authoritative in the way I speak, and just to try to make, because of course it was a woman pretending to be a man, just to try to make the physicality more male. Yeah, I didn't have the, I mean, the Pope Joan, it was quite, I had a hat, so I covered my hair up completely. Mrs. Kidd, it was like proper hair, and then Joyce, it was just all scraped back. So, Vic, you were able to use your hair as well, weren't you? Because you had those crazy pigtails when you were the 16-year-old, but when you were a Victorian, it was all like really, really formal. So I think it was a combination, wasn't it, really, of costume, posture, voice.
The split between characters, was that the suggested split? You know, was it said the person who plays the Pope should also play, you know, Miss Kidd, or
that kind of guidance from the original stage play?
No, and I've seen the play where every part has been played by a different person. So I think that's testament to the quality of the play, that there are so many different interpretations. So you talked about having quite a lot of new ways of approaching rehearsals at the beginning of this. What skills do you think you learned or improved during the rehearsal and presentation of this production?
That's a good question.
I learned how to make a bad meal look good.
Relying on that you actually know what you're going to say without going to look at your script. I'm the same as Lynn. Like every time I get off stage, obsessively looking at my script, even though I probably do. I must at some stage believe I do actually know my lines, and usually I do, but it's just a compulsion. So to learn that, yeah, I couldn't do that. I couldn't even look at it for like a half hour before the play because I was lying on a bed on the stage pretending to be asleep. So that was a learning, that you can do it, to trust that it's in there and it'll come out. And even when you've got to change characters, you can't think while you're in one character what's the lines that are in the next scene, because it'll just totally mess with your head. You just have to trust, I'm going to get there, and when I'm in that place ready to go, it'll come back to me.
If I'd known that I potentially would have been given 2 or 3 parts in a play where I couldn't ever get off, where I would have to get myself dressed on stage and find bits of my costume in a box on the stage, build the set, move the set, speak Latin, I'm not sure I would have auditioned, because, and then I remember when it started to dawn on me that was what we were going to have to do, thinking, I'm not sure I can do all of this, because in another play, in any other play I've been in, the only thing I've really had to worry about is learning my lines. I can come on, go off, check my script. Don't tend to have to do much by the way of costume change. Certainly don't make a set. So I think the thought of it when the penny dropped was pretty awful. So I think maybe what I would take away from it is that actually you can achieve things that you have no idea that you're capable of when you start out on something. And it really was quite a journey. You talked about it being an ensemble piece, and we were all in this awful situation together, weren't we, when we were all just stuck on the stage. There was nothing, once we were out there till the end. But I found the thing, really, really bonding. I found it a wonderful piece to do. All girls together as well, I thought was really, really special.
Yeah. And the discussions that came out of it were really thought-provoking, and I think that's something that I've taken away from it. And I think that
we're all quite interested, aren't we, anyway, I think, in politics, current affairs, women's issues. As women, how can you not have views on women's issues? And it was really nice to be able to talk about those things.
So what issues in this play, I mean, it was written in 1982, what issues are still, worryingly, so relevant today? And, we remember Sarah Everard this week in particular.
For me, with what I'm teaching at the moment in school, we're talking a lot about inequality, the widening inequality between men and women in the workplace. I think that's still an issue. Inequality in society. Obviously, in this play, Caryl Churchill is criticising Thatcher's Britain, and I think a lot of the things she says about Thatcher's Britain, we have said, haven't we? When some of us have talked, politically about the current situation under the present Tory government. I think there are really interesting parallels to be made.
Looking about how women treat women, because like Lynn played Mrs. Kidd's character, who comes in to basically try and persuade Marlene to give her husband the job, and when she sees that Marlene is not going to back down, she's immediately there with like, you know, you ball breaker, that you're going to die alone. And it just, you know, it sort of shows you how women under capitalism can basically end up being almost worse than men under capitalism. It really made me quite sad. You know, it wasn't like, it's not like we forged a beautiful new world. It was more like we've just made the same mistakes as you know, anyone else did.
But wasn't that a lovely contrast between the start of the play, the restaurant scene where these women are celebrating their own individual achievements, and that had a very positive feel, and there was a lot of optimism and positivity in the restaurant scene, and it goes sort of downhill after that, doesn't it? All becomes really quite depressing.
I don't think Caryl Churchill offers any easy answers. She only leaves lots of questions there, really. Some members of the audience walked out at the interval, shocked by the scene featuring menstrual blood. But what else might have shocked our audiences? And maybe as a little extra one, have you ever walked out of a production?
I was quite, yeah, that was a very interesting scene. That's probably one of the most challenging things I've done on stage. And I'm not surprised. I don't know that I'd like to watch it. I just it still kind of gives me a bit of a thinking about doing it. That's kind of quite. It's quite nice that people walked out. I don't know. It's like, yeah,
but isn't it? It's such
really
to provoke such a strong reaction.
Yeah, I don't want people to go out and miss it, but yeah, it was quite.
So there was the practicality of doing it. Hands down my pants and pull my hand out bloodied, and we tried so many different ways. And to be honest, it never ever really worked. Like the most you ever got was like a bit of red and a bit of a shine. But I think people like added to it in their own head, and because they, you know, built it up in their own mind, and I think that's what disgusted them. It's like their own mind disgusted them rather than what was actually happening.
And I am glad, Kerry, that I didn't have to see what you were doing. I was behind a flat at that time, so I'm glad I missed it. We should be putting on, you know, different plays. We should be challenging ourselves and challenging our audience. I don't subscribe to the point of view that everything we do should be safe or, you know, cozy or well known. I think I'd like us as a society to see us do more stuff that's, you know, pushing boundaries in all sorts of ways, because we learned so much from it, didn't we?
Did you prefer the historical or the contemporary characters that you played?
I thought they were all historical. To me, when I read it, I really felt like those characters were historical themselves.
Well, they are to you because you're so young, but some of us were in our 20s in the 80s, and so actually we lived through. I was working in the city in London in the 80s. You know, you can imagine what that was like. I think there have been lots of plays that do the kind of kitchen sink drama stuff that, you know, we saw with Joyce and the family. And I loved the historical bit. I thought it was different. It was unusual. I thought every single one of the women around that table, the historical figures, had a fabulous story to tell. I loved the historical bit. I thought that was, yeah, it's brilliant.
I hadn't really thought about it in that way. I suppose, yeah, I loved both of them, and I loved that they were so different. I suppose that I was thinking maybe probably felt a bit more emotionally connected to my contemporary character, Angie, because she was so sad, and because it was a bit more modern, whereas Isabella, she was like a great historical person, great to play, but you felt a bit of that distance of being a, whereas with a more contemporary person, it felt like you had to represent them in a more realistic contemporary way, because they're closer to where we are. So kind of a bit of a connection, or maybe more of a responsibility to try and do that well. Maybe that was because I was trying to play someone who's however many years younger than me and very different to me in lots of ways. Wow.
Rosie, what do you take away from the play? You had a very different perspective, most of it seeing it on a screen rather than seeing it for real. You were anticipating lockdown theatre.
Well, yes, yeah. I mean, I think one of the things that I found particularly interesting was that first dinner scene where all of the historical characters who were, you know, from a real breadth of history, so it wasn't, you know, they're at this all at the same time. I think almost the audience needed to see it for every performance to actually really understand. And not that I did understand all that was going on by the end of it, because I didn't, but I think the more that you watched that first scene in particular, the more you began to, you know, really sort of understand the characters and see what their strengths were. I think with the other scenes, it was easier because it was more contemporary and it was more, you know, that they are the family and it's the unit. So I think that was, for me, was really interesting. And I think just trying to manage a production which was done quite differently to what a lot of our productions were. I think it probably helped that I'd worked, Ali, with you before on productions. So I think, you know, we'd done Weird Sisters at Stamford Hall, which I'd stage managed and you know, was involved in Copenhagen. I think that came before, didn't it? I've lost track. But to have worked with you and kind of sort of had that bit of understanding of the likelihood is that this is not going to be your run-of-the-mill production, almost helped, because I knew that it would happen and it would work okay, and that people would be there with their lines and we would have the, you know, the food and things sorted. So I think I perhaps didn't have the apprehensions that some of the others might have had.
It had a lot of rewatchability, didn't it? I've been in other plays where, like, by the end of it, I am bored of this play because I've seen it so much. But, you know, even right up to the point where we were sitting on the side watching it, and yes, there was a bit of, yes, we've pulled it off, it's working, it's magic, but also the play in itself stood up. Do you know what I mean? Watching it again and again and again, and kind of, it really has rewatchability to it.
For me, it was a very, very special production, and I shall certainly never forget it. I'm proud of all the plays I do, but I was very, very proud of what we as a team achieved. Yeah, a special play. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ali.
That's it.
You can stop your recording now.
When is WBDS going to do another all-female play? We should have filters that we can put on to make ourselves look
like a cat.
Like a cat.
I'm not a cat.
Yeah, I'm kind of making it up as I go along, really. This was all Justine's idea. It wasn't my idea. I hasten to add.